Understanding wages and inequality requires that we spend some time in the labor market. So looking at the supply for labor and looking at the demand for labor helps us understand wages where they're at. Specifically, looking at the demand for labor helps us understand why, for instance, WNBA players earn less than NBA players. Sometimes it's supply issues, but in this case it's demand for labor issues. The first thing to note is that the demand for labor is what we call a derived demand. So there is no demand for workers in the textile mills and factories unless there is a demand for the textiles themselves. So that gives us a clue about sometimes what can happen to the demand for labor and therefore wages when the demand for the good that the workers are making changes. Here are some examples for your thoughts. Chefs don't exist unless there's a demand for restaurant meals. Pharmacists is dependent on the demand for prescription drugs. Attorneys are dependent on the demand for legal services. In general, we think the demand for the goods and services increases, demand for labor will increase, shift to the right, and vice versa. So let's give a name to this idea of the demand for labor. It's called a couple of different things in different textbooks, but basically we're looking for the revenue generation of the workers to the firms. So what is the monetary value of a worker? It's what she brings to the table. It's the amount of widgets that she makes at the value of the widgets. So for instance, if I make 10 widgets, each sell in the market for $3, I have earned $30 for my employer. This extra output from an extra worker is the marginal product. So that's an idea here of productivity. We've talked sometimes about productivity. It's in here the change in total output from one more unit of labor. Anytime we talk about marginal in economics, we mean incremental or additional. So one more worker or hour of work, whatever that labor denomination is, increasing it by one, how much extra output do we get? And so if I create 10 more widgets, and the value of those widgets is $3, the value of the marginal product is therefore $30. Sometimes this is also called the marginal revenue product, but it's basically a look at how much extra income is generated by one more unit of labor. So that really is the heart and soul of the demand for workers, is how much they earn for their firms. And that should start to give you a hint about why WNBA players earn less than NBA players. Here's a list of things that can shift the demand curve, that can increase or decrease the demand for workers. The first three are on this page, and I lifted them straight from the OpenStax free online textbook, and there's three more on the next page. So you'll notice the first, the derived demand idea. Demand for output really generates the demand for workers. Education and training and technology, those affect the productivity and the number of widgets that we'll all make. So the more education and training that you have under your belt, probably the more productive you are, the more widgets you'll generate, therefore the higher the value of the marginal product for you to your firm. Technology for high-skilled workers will help increase productivity, but for low-skilled workers, it might replace their skills with robots or with machines. So for instance, low-skilled workers might see that their demand for their labor declines as, for instance, machines are developed that can substitute for their work. And this second set of demand shifters is a little more technical, but nonetheless probably pretty straightforward. If there's more widget companies, there's going to be more demand for widget workers. If there are government regulations that require widget workers be certified, the demand for certified widget workers would rise, and demand for non-certified widget workers would probably fall. There's been a lot of talk about this with estheticians, hairstylists, and nail salons. The number of hours required for certification is larger than a lot of other professional disciplines, and so it's an interesting choice of regulation for the federal government and state governments. And finally, price and availability of other inputs. So if widget workers require machines to produce widgets, the price of those machines is interesting. So as technological progress improves and we've got cheaper and better widget machines, even if nothing changes in the training, productivity, and human capital levels of our widget workers, we're going to see more widget workers be hired, because in general the cost of widget production has dropped because the machines required are cheaper. The firm can hire more machines, and they'll need more widget workers to go alongside them. And that is a brief overview of your labor demand. Putting it all together, the price and quantity. So you've got a market for labor here. The price of labor is the wage rate, and the quantity for labor is on the horizontal axis. We've got an upward sloping supply for labor, the substitution effect and the income effect both contribute to this, but mostly for most of us, the substitution effect dominates. So we've got an upward sloping supply curve overall in the market, and we've got a downward sloping demand. So at any point, your intersection of labor supply and demand are what determine the wage rate for this particular, let's say this is low skilled, Bakersfield, oil workers, right? So we can be as specific or as broad as we want with our labor markets, but usually it's helpful in our class especially to sort of be distinct about which market we're talking about. All right. Hope you enjoyed it.